all I have to say.
We're just really happy that you're here. My name is Natalia. Some of you know my brother Nick. We've been wanting to do a workshop about Pysanky for a while. We grew up in a Ukrainian family. We grew up making these eggs. So we had talked about doing this earlier this winter even. I think we had agreed to do it. And then, as I'm sure you've heard, on February 24th of this year, Ukraine was invaded by Russia, which I'll speak for myself, but I think you'll agree with me that it really heightened our sense of the importance of preserving our culture, of sharing and celebrating it. So we're really happy that you're all here. Every single dollar we make from this workshop is going to be donated to humanitarian aid in Ukraine. So thank you for being part of the solution. I want to emphasize this is going to be a hands-on practical workshop, so I'm not going to talk for long. This is not a lecture. But we just wanted to ground what we're doing today in a little bit of context and history to explain what Pysanky are, what they mean in Ukrainian culture. I always think, like, before you start appropriating and doing stuff with something cultural, you should understand where it comes from. So we're just going to do a little bit of that, and then I promise we'll start talking about how you make Easter eggs, or Pysanky, which are actually not Easter eggs traditionally. They were pagan talismanic objects that were made by people starting in the Middle Ages. So who are we to be leading this workshop? This is me and Nick when we were a little bit younger. We've been doing this all our lives. We were sometimes forced to do it when there was nothing else to do. We learned from our grandmother. So this is another embarrassing picture. That's me on the right. That's my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother. And you can't really see, but she's holding a picture of her mother. That's who she learned from. And these are our eggs. So this is a tradition that was often passed down, well, obviously it was passed down from generation to generation. And our grandmother, who's the second from the left, not to brag, but she was one of the foremost artisans of Pysanky. She emigrated to the United States in the 50s, fleeing the Soviet Union, and she basically devoted her life to the research, practice, exhibition, to sharing this culture. She exhibited her eggs at Bill Clinton's pre-inauguration celebrations. She also won a medal of honor from the government of Ukraine for her work to help preserve this. So we were fortunate we're fortunate that we learned from an expert. This is my grandmother not long before she died in her assisted living, and this is her Pysanky station in her apartment. So she was bossing people around and talking about Pysanky until the very end. And I just want to read something about, this was her artist statement basically. She said, "My work is an extension of my love and concern for an ancient, ritualistic folk art that is becoming extinct in Ukraine due to Soviet suppression. I strive to preserve and reconstruct the old ornamentation and symbolic meaning of Pysanky." So that was her mission in life. So Pysanky come from the Ukrainian word pisate, which means to write. So it's a written egg, which we think of them as painted or decorated eggs, but what does that mean? It's a written egg. So as I said, they originated in the Middle Ages, and you have to imagine these were not Christian, these were pagan people in an agrarian society, illiterate people who would use eggs and decorate them with these pictographic symbols. I almost think of this as, like, if you know the cave paintings in Lascaux, like people communicating their wishes and hopes and fears sometimes through this picture language. They weren't really necessarily like art objects. In fact, they weren't. You would use them, you would put these symbols on them, and we'll talk about what the different symbols that you'll see on eggs mean. But they would have different meanings. So like you might make an egg to encourage good health or long life or a good harvest. So they were thought to contain a lot of power. And you'll notice here is a couple. So these are contemporary eggs, obviously. This evergreen branch in the center. Animals were very common symbols: stars, suns, crosses. This wavy line here, I'll talk about that in a second. That's a very ancient symbol, a never-ending line. So they would. Lots of cultures believe that eggs are symbolic. They're this weird, unique shape. You can see eggs in front of you. Eggs are symbols of potential. They contain the embryo of whatever is growing inside of them. So they would have this double meaning of it being this symbolic object that's kind of potent with possibilities, and then you would write these symbols on them. And I want to just emphasize this, like it sort of sounds like, oh, that's like quaint and nice. We watched a documentary just a couple of weeks ago about a healer who lives in Western Ukraine. It was shot maybe 20 years ago, but she was doing this healing ritual, and she's got the Pysanky out, and she's like tapping them, and she's saying, oh, this is like, I have a dark one for when I'm treating a brunette, and then I have this like lighter colored egg for when the blondes come in for a treat, and so this goes very deep in Ukrainian culture, the belief of this power that these eggs have. People would bury them in their fields to have a good harvest. You would roll it over a flower bed. Ukrainians are very big into beekeeping, and we're going to be using beeswax to make these eggs. But they would stick one in the hive, get the bees to swarm there every year. So they were thought to be very powerful. They weren't toys. They weren't even really thought of as art objects. They were more like these objects that were supposed to have like a power. And I want to emphasize it's also not inherently a good or evil power. It was like this natural dualistic power of creation and destruction that kind of coexist in one. Okay, let me move us on. So as I said, these would be passed down intergenerationally, and over time, different styles of eggs would emerge in different regions of Ukraine. So we're not going to talk about this for too long, but just since a lot of these names are in the news right now, I thought it might be interesting to look at some of the stylistic differences. These are some eggs from the Kyiv province. Kyiv is the capital of Ukraine, obviously. So you'll notice like these sort of primary colors of white, yellow, red, and black. Very common color palette, and these very kind of geometric symbols, a lot of the never-ending line, a lot of spirals. So these are some typical Kyiv Pysanky. These are from Poltava, which is east of Kyiv, so different color palette, more flowers, some star symbols. These are from Kharkiv, which you may have heard of in the news. It's in eastern Ukraine, much besieged city right now, but these beautiful geometric symbols and a lot of these evergreen branches and crosses and triangles. These are from Lviv, which is closer to where our family is from. It's in western Ukraine. So you can see that the patterns are a little more intricate. We have a lot of stars. This is Ivano-Frankivsk, which is probably the closest to where we're from. Our family's actually from Ternopil, but they're kind of all clustered together in the west. So much more ornate, and a lot of this kind of cross-hatching pattern, which we'll talk about in a minute. That's a very common design element. Finally, we're not really going to make these types of eggs. These are from the Lemkyiv region. My aunt likes to call this like the hillbillies of Ukraine, and they do like a completely different style where this is actually done with a nail that you dip in beeswax, and then you do this kind of like drop pull, and it kind of creates an amazing pattern. So something to look into if you decide to pursue your Pysanky career beyond today. So these different symbols, there's different styles depending on region, but there are a few key symbols to Pysanky, and some of them are so ancient that you find them in every region of Ukraine. Suns and stars. This is like the original symbol that you would put on an egg. Suns are thought to protect the owner from sickness, to fend off bad luck and the evil eye. Stars, especially this 8-pointed star that you can see up here, where it's kind of like a crosshatch, and then these little diagonals are drawn in. You'll see that on lots of Pysanky. Stars are thought to be signs of good luck, and to foretell good fortune. Secondly, the never-ending line. This is probably the other most ancient symbol. So this is like this wave formation. My grandmother would always say this is like when you're really good, you could do the wave formation, and it looks the same on both sides of the wave. But you can see like number 7 is kind of like I would say the platonic ideal of how that's supposed to look. It's kind of a dividing element. Sometimes it's used for a border, but yeah, this idea that it's a line that never ends, that it goes all the way around the egg and it just keeps going forever. It's a symbol of long life, of immortality, of infinity and harmony. There's a few different ways this can show up. Hello. So this is another never-ending line. This is called Gypsy Roads, which might not be very politically correct, but the idea was that like if the evil spirit was in your house, it would get sort of sucked into the maze and try to follow this line, and it would never get anywhere because it would just go around and around the egg. Yeah. So spirals, similarly, are thought to trap evil spirits, that they would be so bewitched that they would get trapped into these patterns. Spirals are also obviously very natural patterns that you see in nature. And then to get into more geometric patterns. So you'll quickly learn that creating a pattern on an egg-shaped object is kind of tricky. And so like there were a few ways that you would divide up the surface to make it a little easier to design. So this is actually a bit of a misnomer. If you divide an egg this way, that way, and then you divide each of these 8 quadrants into 6 triangles, you actually end up with 48 triangles. This is a little bit of a misnomer, but it became known as the 40 triangles, and especially once Christianity came to Ukraine, 40 is a big number in terms of the days of Lent, so it kind of became known as the 40 triangles, even though it's 48. And you'd very often vary the colors, so you end up with this kind of windmill pattern. And triangles of triangles or tripods, any kind of 3-sided figure or 3-pronged figure, have always been really symbolic. Obviously, we have the Trinity. If you're religious and you practice Christianity, that's an important trio. But also, like the cycles of life, birth, life, and death. Any other trio in nature, like morning, day, nightfall. You would see these patterns a lot, especially on very old Pysanky. And finally, we get into like agrarian symbols, because these people were trying to create eggs that would bring them a good harvest. So rakes, you see a lot, either this crossbow with the teeth or the triangle with the teeth. Rakes were supposed to symbol seeds, the beginning of something new. Good harvest. A lot of these symbolize similar things, let's be honest. A lot of them symbolize prosperity, good harvest, long life. Sort of the preoccupations of ancient people. Ladders, also another popular, hold on, there we go. Ladders are supposed to symbolize ascension, a connection between heaven and earth. So you often see those, again, as sort of a design element to separate out sections of the egg. And then cross-hatching. This is something you'll see on lots of eggs, and it's usually used to kind of fill in an area, like just how here they're like filling in this area. And these existed, these are some of the most ancient symbols. This net, which is supposed to catch the evil eye. It's supposed to protect you from evil. It also kind of looks like some farm implements and things that people in an agrarian society might be making. And then we get into more plant and animal motifs. So the tree of life, obviously, is like a really central image. It would always be symmetrical. Sometimes it would even look like a flower pot. That's what we've got on the right. And then often it would have two deer or two horses next to it. But it was always this symmetrical, kind of highly stylized plant image. And for some context of where that comes from, here's some more depictions of that. So some of them even look kind of like ferns or cactuses. There are a lot of different ways that it would be depicted. But it brings us to this symbol, which is, that's on this poster behind us. This is a Berehinya, which is thought to be like an ancient goddess of protection. And if you've ever been to Kyiv, or if you've seen it on the news, this is the Central Independence Square in Kyiv. This is a monument that was built in the early 2000s after Ukraine regained independence. And if you know the Euromaidan protests that happened, and then the Revolution of Dignity in 2014, that all happened around here. This is Maidan Square. And this lady on top of this column is a Berehinya. So Berehinyas would have either 2 arms, 4 arms, 6 arms. They had to have an even number of arms. So she has 2, but you can sort of see the relationship between those two. It's a similar idea. It's just this very kind of stylized ancient depiction of it. Berehinyas would also sometimes be symmetrical, like an S-shaped. So this is also a Berehinya, even though it just looks like an S. Or they could be sort of depicted as plants. But this is like a protectress, and again, like a very dualistic figure. Like she had the power to create life and also to destroy it. So it's kind of like you're harnessing this essential force in life that's not inherently necessarily a positive force. Branches, again, very stylized. Sometimes you'd see just components like leaves or sprigs of branches. Branches are, signs of new beginnings, of rebirth. The most common branches that you see are evergreen branches. You see these all over eggs, and these are supposed to be signs of eternal youth, of long life. And then oak trees are symbols of strength and power, typically kind of associated like masculine symbol. And then pussy willows. So in Ukraine, if you celebrate Easter in Ukraine, they don't have any palm trees in Ukraine, so they would always substitute pussy willow branches because that's what was available. So then in sort of Christian Easter eggs, you sometimes see these pussy willow branches that are obviously just a depiction of part of the Easter ritual. Horses and deer, you often see them in pairs. These are just like lots of different examples of how they might look. A stag was supposed to, in mythology, they were thought to carry the sun from dawn up until, into the sky, and then back down at the end of the day. They were also thought to carry spirits of the dead into the underworld. So again, this kind of like positive, negative circle of life imagery. Horses were supposed to be symbols of speed, endurance, freedom, and loyalty. We also have, here's some more. These were made actually by my Aunt Jacqueline, who's Belgian, but got very into Pysanky. These are also goose eggs, so I just want to, in case you're like, how did she do that on a chicken egg? She didn't. These are like that size eggs. You can see she's got the two stags there around the little. It's more like a flower of life than a tree of life. Rams, either sort of like a more normal depiction, or I really love this kind of stylized depiction of a ram. Rams are symbols of, where are they? Rams. They were symbols of leadership, strength, dignity, and perseverance. And then fish, you might have seen the fish cabinet of eggs out in the hallway. Fish obviously became sort of a religious symbol, Christ obviously in the fishes, but they've existed for, I'm not sure about these. I've never seen like a blowfish on a Ukrainian Easter egg. Usually they're more elongated, they're kind of stylized, but they're kind of cool if you decide to put a fish on one of your eggs because you have an opportunity to do scales, to do eyes. They can be sort of fun to do. And then birds. Birds I think of as like, I love birds on Pysanky. Birds are supposed to be bringers of good luck. So I like to make a bird Pysanky every year because we could all use some good luck. There's a lot of different ways birds would be depicted. Some of them, these are like little chicks, I think. You have some doves there, a rooster, I'm assuming these are like chickens and little chicks around a chicken coop, and then some like lovebirds or doves. These are kind of, I don't know, this is like from Poltava region. These are supposed to be magpies. I think this is like the creepiest depiction of birds I can imagine. But I think it's really stylistically arresting. And then I don't know where this is from, but I just thought this was kind of a cool combination of that tree of life symbol and then also these little black birds. Crosses. So crosses obviously today have a religious connotation, but originally they were just sort of like you would see them on eggs that had to do with the four corners of the earth, or the four seasons. They were a really kind of elemental symbol that then became an important symbol of Christianity. So just to talk a little bit about Christianity, since these are thought of as Ukrainian Easter eggs. So basically Christianity came to Ukraine around 1000 AD, and there were all these pagan people who were used to making Pysanky, and they were like, well, we'd really like it if you stopped doing that. And they didn't want to stop doing it. So then they kind of adapted a lot of the symbols that had been pagan symbols into these Christian symbols. And they were like, you can keep doing this, but we're going to call this Easter eggs, and we're going to put them in Easter baskets, and we're going to bless food and do all this Christian stuff with it. So they're kind of, like, I think of them as both. I think of them as these symbols of Christianity in contemporary Ukraine, but also, like, the roots of this go way back to pre-Christian times. You also start to see churches on eggs, sometimes very stylized, but this kind of became popular. These are just some pictures of Ukrainian Easter baskets. These are actually my Easter baskets that I made in the pandemic. I had a lot of free time on my hands, so I made some Easter baskets. But typically what you do at Ukrainian Easter is you would to get like, that's like a bread, and then this is like beets and sausage and cheese, and then just some hard-boiled eggs, and then Pysanky, and you would take them to the church and bless them. So that's kind of what most people think of Pysanky today. Oh, okay, so then we're going to get into, so that's traditional Easter eggs. So now I want to talk a little bit. Obviously, you're going to be able to create whatever you want to make today using the information we've given you, but we encourage you to be creative. You're not here to necessarily to replicate traditional designs. So I wanted to share a few examples of non-traditional. This is a non-traditional Pysanky, as you had to notice. I don't know, we're not sure who made this. This is in one of the cases out in the hall. This is one of our favorite eggs growing up, was the Budweiser egg, which was always floating around. This is, I don't know what this is. This is like a weird, like intestine or something. I found this in my grandmother's collection and thought, like, what is this? But it's like, it uses the traditional colors, and then it kind of playfully references these two holes where I guess the egg was blown out. And then I wanted to just share, this is one of my favorites. So you might be familiar with Roz Chast. She's a cartoonist for The New Yorker. If you don't follow her on Instagram and you like her Pysanky, I encourage you to follow her. But she has been making Pysanky for a while, and her Pysanky are incredible. These are, I think this one is called Concern. Like, they're almost like kind of like cartoons. I mean, they are like cartoons. This is the Little Prince at 40. He's in his lazy boy chair. I think this is called Cereal Box. So this, I might not recommend starting with this. This is actually takes a lot of skill to like figure out how to do this color-wise, which Nick will explain. Oh, this is like a Matisse egg she made, and then a Edvard Munch, the Scream egg. This is just, she actually recently made a lot of yellow and blue eggs and sold them to raise money for Ukraine. I think they sold out in like a matter of hours. I own one of her eggs that was given to me. I didn't bring it because I was scared of breaking it, but they're really cool. So if you're interested, that's her handle if you want to follow Roz Chast. So we're gonna shift into doing this now. I think I've been talking enough about the origins of this. This is a little picture of my table in New York. So just briefly, Nick is going to cover this, but Pysanky, this is like a wax resist technique, which means whatever you cover with wax is going to stay the color that you started with. So whatever is going to be white, you're going to cover the white eggshell with wax, that will stay white. And then you dip it into yellow dye, and then you repeat the process as you go through the colors. This on the right is a pretty good depiction of, that's kind of like stage by stage what it looks like. And then this is the final step of the process. This was always my favorite step as a child, which is at the end of the process, you're gonna melt the wax off using the candle. And that's when like the beautiful colors that have been hidden under all this wax will come out. So it's something to look forward to. So this messy looking egg is the one on the bottom right. I made these a few weeks ago. So I just want to emphasize before we get started. So my grandmother would always say that even though she was considered one of the foremost artists of Pysanky, she would always say the execution is secondary. This is primarily about the intention of the person making the egg. And you think of like an illiterate farm woman who's got thick fingers from doing the farm labor she's doing all the time. She's not going to be making the most beautiful straight line on her egg. And I remember one of the last times I talked to my grandmother, because we have all these examples here of beautiful eggs by accomplished artists with very straight lines. And she would say, more commonly you see this shaky line. And she used this word, she said, the shaky line is żyvuchi, which basically means full of life. So I want to encourage you may discover that writing in hot wax on a rounded surface is a little harder than writing with a pencil on a flat surface. I want you to embrace the mistakes. There's no erasers in Pysanky. I have a beautiful egg I just made with a giant blob of wax that fell on it. There's nothing I can do about it. That's just part of the beauty of that egg. So if your lines are shaky, it just means they're full of life. And and I would just say as like maybe as a final thought that if you feel like putting some intention into the eggs that you make, whether that's wishing good health or long life to someone you love, or even for yourself, or peace, or any other idea that we can, that can be an ingredient in what we do today, that it's not just about creating an art object, it's also about the intention. So we're now going to shift our focus. Nick is going to show us a step-by-step process of how you make these eggs. You might want to gather in this room, because I think you're going to sit up front, right?
I'm going to sit here.
Okay.
That's all if you want to bring chair.
Or sit on the floor, or stand.
Right here. Okay, so first thing I'm going to talk about is how do you get the eggs to be hollow? Because I know a lot of people, like in elementary school or whatever, like will make 2 holes on an egg, like one at the top, one at the bottom, with like a drill bit, and then they recommend blowing it out. I personally don't really like doing that. So they sell these little contraptions online that are like, I don't know, $15. It looks like this, but there's a lot of different brands of them. But so you want to make, the first thing you want to do is make a drain hole on the egg. So the way I figure out where to do it is I'll take a pencil and I like scribble some pencil onto a piece of paper like this, because I'm usually not just blowing out one egg, I usually blow out a bunch in a row. And then you take the egg and you hold it upright, so like the butt is facing down, and you hold it upright, and then you can rub it on the pencil you just wrote, and then you end up with like a mark, and you know that that's the bottom of the egg. So like if you empty the egg out and then you let it sit like that for a while, everything's going to be coming out of that bottom. And these kits come with like a little special drill thing like this. So all you do is you gently get started. All right, so that's now got a hole in it. And then you take this thing and this needle part, you poke it into that hole and kind of poke it around in there to bust up the yolk. And then you need something to put the stuff in. So then you just start pumping. And you don't want to go crazy pumping because the egg can burst pretty easily. You know, it's funny, I just blew out all these eggs for the class and they all blew out a lot easier than this. But they were also different eggs because all these eggs are from like the supermarket and this is an egg from our pet chickens. Look at that. A lot of eggs today.
So is that pumping air into the egg?
Yeah, it's just like a little bellows. Yeah. Maybe it's that the pump didn't get cleaned out and then that's what happened. Yeah, sorry. Well, I'll see if I can figure it out later. But this thing got clogged. Like if you don't run clean water through it after you pump the eggs out, this like thing will get full of egg. And then now when I'm pumping it, no air's coming out.
Thankfully, we emptied all your eggs for you.
But yeah, we have plenty of eggs.
It's not going to be a problem for her today.
I have a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Do people consume do they empty the eggs and then presumably, yes, eat the scrambled egg later? Or is it sort of a discarded, and is there any significance to it?
I'm not sure if there's significance to it. I eat them a lot. But then, like, obviously with all the eggs that we blew out for this class, I didn't eat them all.
Sure.
But actually what I did with them is kind of weird. I told my sister this, and she was weirded out by it. But, so at the end, you end up with this big, massive bowl of basically, like, scrambled eggs. And we just pour it into, like, a cast iron pan and put it in the oven and heat it up. And then we have chickens. And we feed it to them. Yeah. And that sounds like really weird to a lot of people to like feed eggs to chickens because it's like, I don't know. But they go crazy when you feed it to them. It's like their favorite food. Yeah. They go absolutely crazy. So then my sister mentioned the idea of doing divisions on eggs. Because first, what you want to do first is do like a full pencil layout. You want to draw everything that you want to put on the egg in pencil because it's a lot easier to plan it out with pencil than it is to try to freehand it with like a wax tool, because the wax tools are like a little bit awkward. You know, like the eggs are round, so you're kind of like, it's usually a combination of moving the egg and moving this thing, or holding this thing still and moving the egg. So to make those divisions, there's a couple tricks that I've learned. One of them is to use a rubber band, and there's rubber bands at each of the tables. But you can take a rubber band and wrap it around the egg like this, and that'll let you get like much straighter lines than if you're like freehanding it, you know? So you can put the rubber band like that and then just trace along the edge of it. And then you get like a pretty nice line. Whereas like if you're just trying to like draw it on, it's not as easy. The other trick that I do, because a lot of these designs are sort of geometric, so it sort of like you want to divide the egg up into 4 quadrants, or into half at least, or some of them even call for like dividing it into 6. So what I'll do is I'll draw like a right angle on a piece of paper like that, which is like pretty easy to do, just eyeballing it. And then you can take this little egg cup and line it up on top. Put little hatch marks here. And then when you sit your egg in here, you put the drain hole that's going to be like the very bottom if you use that little technique facing up. And then it makes it really easy to just take a pencil and you just can kind of connect these lines together. So then you take it out and you can flip it over and line it up again with those same marks, and then connect the dots kind of. So now I got an egg that's got these 4 quadrants. And then normally what I'd want to do is I'd want to do a line around it. I'm just going to demonstrate a quick design where I'm dividing the egg up in different ways just to show you. And so then what you want to do is find what they call like the waist of the egg, which means you do the opposite. You hold it this way with one of your lines down, and you can rub it like that. And that'll kind of leave you like a smudgy thing right where the egg is the thickest. And that'll be kind of like where you want to, you know, you can do it on a few of them. And you can start connecting it. Like that. So now I got this egg divided up like that. So now I'll go into applying the wax to the egg. Normally you would do a much more elaborate design, obviously.
Yeah, worth pointing out that the pencil marks come off. It sort of seems like they wouldn't, but they do. And if they don't all come off, you can wipe them off with turpentine.
Yeah, the only thing you don't want to do is you don't want to flip your pencil around and use the eraser on them, because in general when you're handling your egg you want to have clean hands, because any like oils that are on your hand, or if you're touching the wax a lot and then touching the egg, those spots will get some wax and the dye won't absorb as well onto them. And the other thing you want to do is you want to wipe like obviously the eggs are probably pre-cleaned, but like after you pump them out they'll have like a little bit of residue on the bottom drain hole. You want to clean the eggshell off with like vinegar, or like vinegar mixed with water, just so that it's totally clean and it will take the dye as well. So to do like the designs on eggs, we use a tool called a kistka, which is like, they come in all kinds of sort of different styles. Like these are the most traditional ones. This is like what comes in that kit that's on your table. But there's other ones too, like this one I think is like an old dental tool that then has like this kind of a tip put on it. And then like this is just like a box that I got from my grandmother that just has like tons of different styles, you know, like weird sort of handmade, I don't even know what this thing is. But you can see like this is a really weird one made out of like a fountain pen and a bunch of wire. So you could, you know, it's basically just like a funnel. And then I think that the kits that you have on your table will have wax like this. It's like a golden color. It's just the natural beeswax. But there's also a square on each setting that's black. And what that is it's just that same kind of beeswax with a little bit of shoe polish melted into it. And that won't stain your egg when you write on it. It will still just preserve the color that's underneath it. And the benefit of that is that when you write with the clear wax, it actually kind of goes on, even though it's yellow, it kind of goes on clear. And it becomes a little bit confusing once you've got several colors on the egg, knowing which parts are covered and which parts aren't. So you need, I just use my fingers and pick off little bits of wax off of these things. But if that's hard for you, there's knives in the cups that are on the table. And so you just pick off like a little piece of wax like this, and then you stick it into this part of the funnel, and then start heating it up.
And so the concept is that you're covering the parts of the egg that you don't want to get dye on?
Yeah, like so right now what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be covering all the parts of this egg that I want to keep white, which in this case is just going to be what I just drew on it.
And why do you want to keep them white?
Just for, that's part of the design. I mean, you have to, when you're dyeing the eggs, you're going to be going from lightest colors to darkest colors. So the order that we have, basically, if you want to use all of the colors, you would go, first draw anything you want to be white on, and then you would dip the egg into the yellow dye. Then you take wax and repeat that process and draw everything that you want to be yellow onto the egg, and you go through that. You don't have to use all the colors, but you do have to use them in the specific order, because once you go to orange, you can't go back to yellow. I mean, technically there are ways you can go back. You can bleach the egg, and you can even just like run it under water and rub it, and it'll take some of the old dyes off, and you kind of can do it. But in this classroom setting, it would just be really impractical to have people going and trying to wash the eggs. So the first thing you do is you want to plug this hole that you made. So you just get a sort of a heavy glob of wax on your thing and poke it in there and cover that hole so you make sure it's completely sealed, because this is going to go under dye. So if you don't do that right, the egg can start filling up with dye. And it's not the end of the world, but it makes a mess, because then like at the end you're going to melt all the wax off and there'll be dye in here, and that dye can get rubbed around and ruin your design. So I'm just going to do really quickly, like draw these lines onto the egg that I drew. And then I'm going to show you like how I deal with dyes, because a lot of people do it differently. Like some people just like get a big spoon and weigh their egg down with a big spoon in the dye. I've like kind of started doing it with cups of water. Like I find that pint-sized mason jars are the best size for doing this, because the dye packets that you buy at most of these suppliers call for like 10 ounces of water to be added to them. And that leaves just enough headspace in the jar that you can weigh the egg down with a little cup of water, and the jar won't overflow. So I'll show you that in a minute.
How much pressure are you using? Are you dragging the wax? Or are you
I'm using
pressing
almost
down?
no pressure.
Okay.
It's just touching the tip. And then also like each setting has like newsprint on the table. I definitely recommend before you start writing with this thing on your egg to practice on here. Like you want to be able to like get used to the feeling of what it feels like to write with this thing. Because it's pretty different than writing with a pencil. Like it's just like oriented differently. So it feels pretty different.
And the temperature of the wax is also something that you kind of have to experiment with. Like if it's not quite warm enough, it's not going to come out.
Yeah, and the other thing which you really have to worry about is like if it's not quite warm enough, sometimes it will come out and it'll write a line on the egg, but the wax will not have completely adhered to the eggshell, and it's super disappointing when that happens because it can flake off, and then you'll put it in another dye, and it just your lines won't be as crisp. So I recommend trying to make sure you get this thing pretty hot.
Also, if your Kiska's really full of wax, you'll get blobs if it's really hot. So I recommend writing out on the sheet to get the initial blobs out.
Yeah.
Because when those go on your egg, there's unfortunately nothing you can really do about it.
Yeah, there's no way to go back. Like you can't, once you get wax on the egg, it's kind of there permanently. Whereas the pencil marks do wipe off pretty easily.
It's just
All right.
like life, you have to embrace your mistakes, embrace what happens.
So this is just so that you guys, like, a problem you can run into is like cross-contaminating your dyes. So what I've got set up here for us today is like each one of these dyes has a corresponding little cup that has water and has a little bowl that you can put it in. And so that way you don't really have to worry about like you don't want to use the yellow cup in the green dye or whatever. So you take the lid off of the dye, and then you take the egg, drop it in, and then you put this on top. And that's what I'm talking about. See how the dye goes almost up to the top, but it won't overflow. Unless you put too much water in there, and then it will overflow. But yeah, you just sit the egg in there. Usually like there'll be one spot on it that's not getting dyed because the cup's touching it. So I'll usually like do that and then spin it, and then put it back under. But yeah, that's basically it. And then you take a paper towel. You can put gloves on if you want. And then we have one set of this little tool, which you can also use to get the egg out. So once your egg you can kind of see what color it's reached. And if it's reached like a yellow that you're happy with, then you can take the egg out of there.
Is there anything like vinegar in that dye?
There's 1 tablespoon of vinegar in each of the in each thing dye, and I think that just helps it sort of like adhere to the shell.
Yeah, and if you have dyes that you've kept for a while, like you have dye packets in your take-home kits, and if you've, like it's the next year and you pulled them out and you find they're not dyeing as much, you can just pour a little white vinegar in and it kind of pumps it up again.
Alright, so now we've got this egg dyed yellow, and then I'm just going to show you like, I'm not sure if you guys want to just look at this, like come up and look at it, or if you want to pass it around, but this is kind of what it looks like at different stages. Like this is an egg that has had the wax applied to the areas they want to be white, and then this is, once it's dyed yellow, you can see it'll have these black lines on it, but this also has green on it. And then once it's red, like more and more of the egg will get covered up with black as you get to the darker colors. Like at the end, this is an egg that's had like, it's reached its final color of dye, which is black. Like black is always, that's as dark as you can get it, obviously. So that'll always be your final color unless you don't want to use black, in which case like blue or red would be. So to take the wax off, what you want to do is you want to hold the egg close to the candle like this. And as you do that, you'll see like the wax on it kind of turn liquid. What you don't want to do is you don't want to hold the egg directly above the candle, because what that'll do is it'll make the parts of your egg that are colored like sooty. But yeah, see, it just wipes right off, and then it reveals all the colors that are underneath it.
Is the wax what gives it its sheen in the end?
I don't think so, I'm not sure.
I don't think so. I think that's the heat. I mean, a lot of the eggs we have displayed here are varnished. That's something that you do once the whole
Okay.
process is done. We can explain how you do that. We won't be able to varnish the eggs you make today because it takes a while for them to dry, but we can explain to you how to do that at home
Okay.
if you feel like.
Also,
like
if you
shining
live
in
in
your
town,
We don't, we're visiting.
yeah, we won't be able to do this, but you can't, like I have varnish here, and if you wanna varnish them and then pick them up tomorrow, I'm happy to do that. But otherwise, I can just also show you what kind of varnish to use, which is anything that's oil-based, because like if you use a water-based varnish, the dyes aren't necessarily like, they're kind of water soluble, so you might mess up your design too. And then, yeah, so for the varnishing, this is what I use. It's just like polyurethane. It's kind of stinky, and you just brush it on thin. Usually what I'll do is I'll do the bottom of the egg first. So you'll take all the wax off the egg, brush the polyurethane onto the bottom, then you put it onto like I have these little spiky boards, but you can just use a piece of cardboard with some thumbtacks and basically make the same thing. And so once the bottom's varnished, then you put it here, and then you kind of just varnish your way up until you cover the whole thing, and then your egg's preserved. Because if you don't varnish it, it's still fine, but over time, if the egg gets wet, your design can get messed up. And then also, like if you display your egg somewhere in the sun, the colors will get bleached out, and like in a couple of years, your design will be a lot less clear. But I think that's it. So.
Так за мною хлопці шли, ей, ой, так за мною хлопці шли,